My name is Alyson. I am a senior and a practicum student here at UWSP. I will be graduating next month. Very excited. While we're here today, we're going to learn about the story of Lake Joanis, ranging from the history of it to the life that it gives around it, as well as the benefits that it provides for anyone who visits. This does include a hike to the lake. There are a couple stops on the lake that we're going to stop, and I'm going to give you some information. I have a couple activities out there for all of us. So at this time, I would like you to prepare to get cold. So take your coats, your hats, your gloves. This is the moment where you can go to the bathroom if you need to before we leave, and we'll just meet in here before we walk out. A little cold, but that's okay.
Actually really warm.
Yeah.
A lot warmer than yesterday, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's good to hear, because we're going to be around the lake the whole rest of the time, so hopefully it's still warmer than yesterday. But we have made it to Lake Joanis here, so we're going to dive right into the story of it. So Lake Joanis actually was man-made back in 1975 to 1976. At the time, the chancellor of UWSP was Mr. Dreyfus. He wanted to add a lake to Schmeeckle at the time. So I've got a map here of all the patchwork buyings that they did throughout the years. We're looking at this 50-acre plot here, which is where the lake now sits. So it's the biggest chunk that was bought. And at the time, he was set on having a lake at the park, but there was one problem: funding, like everything else. Along with that, they were having a very hard time actually figuring out, because while he wanted a lake, he didn't think it was practical. So they made a list of everything else that they could possibly put in this 50-acre plot. Does anyone want to take any wild guesses at what was on this list?
Parking lot.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
A parking lot, which you know is the greatest thing we can do here in America, is put a parking lot in the nature center. Also, they had specific apartment complexes they wanted to put here, including married senior student housing, so you had to be married and a senior to live in the housing. And they also just had senior housing that they wanted to put here, which is now on property over there.
Wasn't there a ski hill in there too?
Yes. I don't know how well that would go over, but you never know. So they kind of just left it for a while because none of those ideas really resonated with what they wanted to do. And it took 9 years before Mr. John Jonas, who was the CEO of Century at the time, decided that he wanted to build a new building for Century Insurance. For reference, the building I'm talking about is the one that's sitting on the hill right next to 39. And his big idea for that was he wanted this building on a hill to basically overlook Stevens Point. So really, if you think about it, they got together because Dreyfus wanted a lake and John Jonas needed the dirt. So they collaborated and they started the work here. I can have some fun pictures here that show exactly what the excavation looked like. So this is one of the machines that they used to dig out the lake. It did only take a year, and I did learn that they buried a car. So that's a fun fact. There's a car buried around here somewhere. Yep, and they worked right through. Yeah.
Fish habitat.
Fish habitat, yep.
It's buried.
Buried, not in the lake.
So with the excavation of the lake, they finished in 1975. And we are now going to walk to what is the deepest part of Lake Schmeeckle. We will not be taking a dip in it though, so don't worry.
Here.
So, as I did mention, that they dug out the lake pretty quickly, but they realized one big problem that they had. And that was the fact that Mr. Jonas actually had too much dirt now. But they also had another issue because they needed the lake to at least be 26 feet deep at points to provide habitat for the fish they wanted to put in there. So they kept digging, and this is where our lovely island comes in. What they did with all the extra dirt is they kind of just plopped it in the middle, let it settle, and that's how we got our island. There's nothing special about it. But once everything was dug out. So this is the deepest part. It is the 26-foot deep depth right behind me. Once that was all dug out, it started instantly filling with groundwater. Now that's important, and I'll come back to that in a second, but I do want to take a moment to recognize that this is actually the memorial for Mr. Jonas, because he helped realize this dream. Now, Lake Jonas was not always called Jonas. So does anyone want to take a guess at what it was called before? No guesses?
Lake Stevens Point.
No, not Stevens Point.
Lake Dreyfus.
Lake Dreyfus. And that's actually a trick question too, because there was no official name for the lake before. They called it either Lake University Lake or Lake Dreyfus. But in 1994, after Mr. Jonas had passed, Mr. Dreyfus and Mr. Jonas's wife held a celebration for them, and it was at this dedication that they actually officially named the lake Lake Jonas. And Mr. Dreyfus was the one who gave the lovely speech, and he said, quote, about Mr. Jonas, "While the lake was my dream, without John Jonas it would not exist. He made it happen." So nice little tidbit there. We got the memorial, and it is now Lake Jonas. So before we head off to our last stop, I actually have something for you guys. As I said, the lake started filling with groundwater, and this caused people to flock around the lake. But this caused a lot of problems. So on our way to our next stop, there's a couple things I want you to do. If you would like, I have M&Ms here. And this is actually going to give you the answer you need if you pay attention to what's happening. So I want you to think of the problems that people flocking the shorelines would have caused on Lake Jonas, as well as warming up these M&Ms in your hands. You don't have to take them if you don't want to, but it's a fun little activity. And I do have baby wipes for after the activity. You good? You want some?
Oh, yeah. Put 'em on.
I'm good.
You want some, Carly?
I'm okay.
Yeah. I put them in my hand.
I am well aware that they probably won't be able to stop themselves.
Maybe keep one in your.
At least one. Yeah, of course.
Just throw them in the mouth and see what happens.
Yeah.
You good? You want some? Okay.
And then yesterday, just put this little
All right, everyone got their M&Ms and their thoughts? All right, we're gonna go off to our last stop.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so I think everyone's back. So we have two options here. I'll let you pick. So I could take your answers to why you thought people flocking the shoreline was bad for the lake, or I could have you look at the M&Ms and give you the answer.
It's got messy.
Yeah. All right, I think some of you are looking at the M&Ms. So what happened to your M&Ms?
Well,
My hand turned color.
mine didn't melt because I've been moving them around. But that's what it was.
So the color came off, and this is why I had this activity in here, because that exactly you can eat your M&Ms now, by the way. And that exactly correlates to what happened when people were flocking the shoreline. So because these people were on this newly excavated sand, it was a hot summer, and they obviously saw groundwater lake, and they're like swimming, right? As one does. So, oh, it ripped. So because of this, it actually caused a lot of erosion from the shoreline into the lake, which is why the M&M activity was fun. Does anyone else need a wipe? No?
I'll
Okay.
lick my hand.
So, I'll show you the picture here, because it is quite interesting how many people saw the water and instantly were like, yeah, that's a great spot to go swimming. A newly excavated lake. So with the erosion, that also caused problems with the plant and native habitat not being able to sprout at all. So it was a barren sand shoreline. With that, in comes Mr. Greel. Now, Mr. Greel was a manager of conservancy, and he had a whole team under him that worked for the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act program. And basically I had to read that off. Basically what they did is they closed down this whole area. And I don't mean just the shoreline. They closed off all of the trails and everything around the lake to be able to establish that plants and everything can grow. So they did that in May of 77. By August of 77, they had enough established that they were able to open the trails back up for walkers, bikers, people who wanted to walk the trails, but there was still no swimming allowed. To this day, you are still not allowed to swim in Lake Joanis, which is fine because it's probably very cold. But there are an abundance of things that you can actually do on the lake. In comes your drawings from earlier. I had a couple kayakers. You held binoculars up, so birding can count, especially around the lake with our waterfowl. What else can you do on the lake, do you think? Yeah.
You can walk on ice.
Yes, you can walk on ice fishing and walking to the island. I will say, if you're walking to the island, be smart about it. I did that one year. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I went by myself. So just not my brightest moment. I don't recommend doing that. But it is fun to go on the island. It's like its own little wonderland, essentially. So I recommend it, but make sure like it's been -degree weather so the ice is thick enough. My train of thought is if there's ice fishers on the lake, you're probably good. But along with that, you can kayak on this lake. I have done that before. The visitor center actually rents out all the equipment you need. I think it's $25 and then $10 for each additional one. So if you wanted to do that, you could. I recommend it. It's quite fun. But we're gonna go right back into Mr. Greel's mission here. So in 1977, after they opened everything back up, it actually fit perfectly into Schmeeckle's first part of their mission statement, which is refuge. So by establishing the native plants that they planted and were able to grow, these aren't plants, but they added boulders along the shoreline to stop the erosion. So this fit in perfectly by providing habitat and everything for animals to live in. Because of this effort, there are now 55-ish different species of plants that are around the lake only. So not including the rest of Schmeeckle, but around the lake, there's 55 different species of plants. And they found this out because Schmeeckle allowed Portage County to do a lake study back in 2003. During this lake study, they found a lot of interesting things. The first thing to note, though, is with the shoreline partially being eroded and partially because it was man-made, there's a lot of very steep walls that plants can't grow. So really the only areas that plants can grow in the water on the lake is going to be along the north shoreline up there. We won't walk over there because it's quite a walk, but this makes it like a bog environment. So they actually found sundew, which is this, which they were very shocked about, and I was eager to learn why, because sundew grows in tropical acidic bogs. So they were very shocked to see that information there, see the plant growing. And then they also found lace-leaved violet, which also grows in similar areas. Another thing they found that they were shocked at the time, but is now very common in the lake, is Eurasian water milfoil. So actually, if you look over the dock, you can actually see it growing. But they didn't at the time, and they only found it because it had been disrupted from the soil in the lake and washed ashore. This fits into Schmeeckle's second part of their mission statement, which is research and education. Now, the education is the fun part. We, as students of UWSP, get to come out on the lake and do different studies and everything. If you were lucky enough, like me, to have your water quality class in the spring semester, you actually get to walk out onto the lake and take different things like oxygen levels, and you get to use this, which is a Secchi disc. Basically what you do with this, I would love to do a reading with you guys, but it is not deep enough over here to do a reading. But typically a rope is tied to this eye hook here. It's marked off by foot increments. And what you do is you lower this down into the water until the lines on the disc become blurred and you can no longer see the separate colors. At this point, you put your hand right at the water level, mark the depth and pull it up and measure it, and that's how you measure the transparency of the water. And this is important because this will give you what different habitats are allowed. This allows you to know how deep plants can grow because the sunlight can reach, and that also can tie into oxygen levels, because the deeper the plants grow, the more oxygen is going to be in the lake. So that also ties in, ooh, that wasn't smart, to the education aspect of the mission statement. Now, the last thing I have talked about is some recreation activities, which is the third part of the mission statement. There's so much you can do on the lake if you're an ice fisher or kayaker or just hiker in general. You could come out here. If you don't like to ice fish and you fish regularly, you're more than welcome to fish off the shoreline. You can fish off this dock, which is new this year, last year, but they only ask that you don't wade in the water because that's still, it is in line with the no swimming on the lake. So with that, we've talked a lot about the lake today, from the story in which how it was created into the life that is here that we can give it, that the lake provides itself. I also want to take this moment to remind you that while you're here at Schmeeckle, we ask that you follow the leave no trace mindset. So if you come out here and fish and your line breaks, try to get it out of the water if you can. Make sure you pick up all your trash. We want to make sure that future generations can enjoy Schmeeckle and the lake area at all times. So with that, wherever you go in the world, even college towns like Stevens Point, we do want you to think that everything has a story, even if you don't think it does. And that's all I have for you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.